there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. One man, one microphone, one mission, one message. True News, the only newscast reporting the countdown to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And now for the most powerful hour on radio, here is end-time newsman, Rick Wiles.
This is True News, 1 hour of uncensored news, views, and commentary. Welcome to the program. I'm Rick Wiles. Swiss investor Marc Faber will call True News in 20 minutes from Hong Kong. You can always be sure he'll have a fascinating insight into the global financial system and the coming super depression. So you don't want to miss this upcoming interview with the one and only Marc Faber. First, the world headlines. Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, landed at Ben Gurion Airport today in Israel. General Dempsey is the guest of Israeli Defense Force Chief of Staff General Benny Gantz. He will meet with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Yaalon. They are expected to discuss plans to strengthen cooperation between the American and Israeli militaries. General Dempsey will later travel to Jordan, where the U.S. has kept military forces, including an F-16 squadron, on standby for possible deployment in Syria. The Times of Israel said the American general and Israeli leaders will discuss Iran, Syria, and terrorist activities in the Sinai. His visit comes on the heels of the 4-day visit to Israel last week by General Mark Welsh, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force. London's Guardian reported that the NSA has a secret backdoor into its vast databases under a legal authority, enabling it to search for U.S. citizens' emails and phone calls without a warrant. Senator Ron Wyden told the London paper that Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act provides the NSA with the loophole allowing warrantless searches of communications by law-abiding Americans. Dozens of guests at an Orlando resort near Walt Disney World were evacuated late Sunday when 2 condo buildings collapsed into a massive sinkhole. No injuries were reported. Homosexual-themed Diversity Day celebrations were held on numerous U.S. military bases last week. The Los Angeles Air Force Base invited Jules and the Brunchettes, a drag queen group. It's the Bunchettes. Jules and the Bunchettes, a drag queen group, to participate as a symbol of gay pride and unity. The Air Force Public Affairs spokeswoman Peggy Hodge said the Drag Queen Act represented the struggle for freedom and equality. Diversity Day was also celebrated at Minot Air Force Base. Master Sergeant Janissa Wallace said the Pentagon ordered the base to include the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered culture to its mandatory list of heritages to celebrate. Gospel music singer Donnie McClurkin was disinvited from performing at a concert celebrating the upcoming 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's March on Washington. Mr. McClurkin has stated in the past, when giving his testimony of salvation, that Jesus Christ delivered him from homosexuality as a youth. A spokeswoman for Washington, D.C. Mayor, the mayor's office of Washington, D.C., said that Mr. McClurkin's appearance at the event would be divisive. A young Christian couple from Arizona was lost at sea after attempting to flee the United States of America. Sean and Hannah Gastonque, said they fled America because they cannot live in a country that aborts babies, marries same-sex couples, and has state-supported churches. They were rescued at sea by a Venezuelan fishing vessel. In Africa, Christian leaders have denounced former Archbishop Desmond Tutu's comment that he would rather go to hell than live in heaven with a homophobic God. Russia will enforce its tough new anti-homosexual propaganda law when the 2014 Winter Olympic Games are held in that country. The Interior Ministry, which controls Russia's police force, confirmed today that athletes and spectators who distribute homosexual propaganda in the presence of minors will be arrested and prosecuted. Alexander Zhukov, head of Russia's National Olympic Committee, also confirmed that sexual orientation among athletes will not be targeted by Russian police, only the promotion of homosexuality to Russian children. Now, speaking on MSNBC this morning, New York Senator Charles Schumer called President Vladimir Putin a schoolyard bully. Senator Schumer wants U.S. Olympic athletes who march in the opening ceremonies in Russia on February 7th to wave the homosexual rainbow flag to protest Russia's stand against gay rights. Mr. Schumer told MSNBC that athletes waving the gay pride flag would embarrass President Putin before the entire world. Meanwhile, California State Senate President Daniel Steinberg plans to submit a resolution in Sacramento in the General Assembly calling on California's two biggest public retirement plans to halt all financial investments in Russia in protest of that country's support of traditional marriage. And the Wall Street Journal reported that the number of Americans who renounced their U.S. citizenship in the first 3 months of 2013 is nearly double the number for all of 2012. 679 Americans tore up their U.S. citizenship and passport in 2012. In the first 3 months of 2013, a whopping 1,130 Americans have told Washington what it can do with its Nazi police state. Now, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act was cited by the Wall Street Journal as the chief reason for the spike in the number of Americans who have said, I've had enough, I'm out of here. Now, I want to take a few minutes before Marc Faber comes on the program, and I want to talk about these two issues. Number one, let's talk about the young Arizona couple that got lost at sea. The media is beating up on this young couple. They're in their mid-20s, Christian couple. And the news media is really beating up on them. And I certainly don't want to criticize them. How they got lost at sea, that's another matter. Perhaps they were inexperienced sailors. I don't know what the situation was, and I certainly don't want to criticize them. But I want to point out to you how the media is treating a couple that said, we're out of here, we're leaving, we're fleeing. America has become Babylon. That's really what this family is saying. Listen to this story. This is from the Daily Mail in London. An extremist religious family with two small children have been rescued after being lost at sea for nearly 3 months when they attempted to abandon the U.S. in a small boat and sail 3,300 miles to the Polynesian island nation of Kiribati. I'm not saying that right. Kiribati. Yes, it's spelled Kiribati, but the pronunciation is, and to me it looks like it ought to be Kiribati, but I think it's like Kiribati. Somebody out there on the island of Kiribati is listening to me, and you can email me and tell me how to say it. But for today it's going to be Kiribati, okay? The Gastonguay family from northern Arizona set sail from San Diego in May with their newborn infant and 3-year-old daughter. They believe that they needed to flee the nation because of what they see as government support for homosexuality, abortion, and restrictions on religious freedom. The family was almost immediately beset by storms. They drifted for months, running low on supplies until they were picked up by a passing tanker. You know where this is going. They're going to be charged with neglect of their children, endangerment of their children. On Friday, the family landed in Chile and are expected to be flown home today on flights booked by the U.S. State Department. They said that they wanted to go to Caripas because, quote, we didn't want to go anywhere big. They wanted to believe the island was one of the least developed countries in the world. The article says Caripas is a group of islands off the equator, halfway between Hawaii and Australia. Population of 100,000 people, primarily Micronesian. The country is 96% Christian. Sounds like a great place to go. I probably would have got on the boat with them. An island that's 96% Christian. I could do that. I could live there. Hannah Gastonguay said her family was fed up with government control in the U.S. She said, as Christians, they don't believe in abortion, homosexuality in the state-controlled church. She said U.S. churches aren't their own anymore, that the government regulation has interfered with religious independence. She said that she had a problem with being forced to pay taxes that pay for abortions. They weren't members of any organized church. She said their decision came through faith by reading the Bible and prayer. Well, it goes on with this story. Of course, the media, like I said, is calling them religious extremists. And I want you to hear this because this is what you're going to see more and more cases of this in the days, months, and years ahead, of Christians fleeing the United States of America. We're going to have boat people again, not coming to America, but leaving America because of the rising level of sin, the acceptance of sin in this country, the acceptance of rebellion against God, because of the persecution of the church, because of the hostility towards the cross, the hatred for the cross. This is going to accelerate in the years ahead. And you're going to hear more and more reports about Christians fleeing, like Cubans fled Castro, floating on anything that would float in the ocean, trying to get to Florida. That's how bad it's going to get. You might not believe it yet. You just hang around for a few more years and under El Presidente Obama, and you just watch and see what happens in this country. See, the spirit of hatred against the cross has been released. The election of Obama brought in a demonic power from hell. And I hope the left-wing news media, I hope you put every word I say on MSNBC and on your stupid, idiotic websites. Please give me more publicity. Mr. Obama and the Obaministas ushered in a spirit of Antichrist. It is a hatred against Christianity. At the core of it, it is a hatred of God. And it's going to accelerate in this country. And you're going to hear more and more reports about Americans fleeing, trying to get away from Babylon, trying to get away from the persecution, just wanting to, just desiring to live someplace where they can live a Christian life without being harassed by the government, being mocked by the news media, without some medical authority trying to jab their children with vaccines and some school trying to indoctrinate their children with socialist, anti-God, humanistic education. We just want to live a quiet life. We don't want to bother anybody, but we don't want to be bothered. Well, it's going to get so bad that Christians are going to have to leave. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about which is in connection to this. And I only have a few minutes before Marc Faber calls in from Hong Kong. Listen, it has to do with this other story, Wall Street Journal, that the number of people who have ripped up their U.S. citizenship actually doubled in the first 3 months of 2013 in comparison to all of 2012. You know why? Because after the re-election of El Presidente Obama, people said, oh, no, you got to be kidding. It's going to get really bad now. And, of course, the main thing is this Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act that the Obaministas sneaked into law during the reign of terror of Nancy Pelosi under the bill called the HIRE Act, H-I-R-E, Hiring Incentives to Restore Employment Act. Basically, FACTA, which is what it's called, it requires all foreign financial institutions located in other countries, okay, banks, financial institutions in other countries must tell the IRS that Americans have accounts there and how much money is in those accounts. And if you don't, as an American, if you don't report all of these bank accounts and financial activities you have in other countries, you are facing stiff fines, tens of thousands of dollars, and time in the clinker. They'll lock you up and put you in prison. Now, this is what I wanted you to know. We've got tens of thousands of American missionaries spread around the world. They aren't aware of this law, and they don't understand that technically, right now, legally, they are money launderers in the eyes of the U.S. Justice Department. I'm telling you, in the days and months and years ahead, the U.S. government is going to shut down Christian missionary work. They're going to use FACTA to shut down Christian missionary work. And that's why I now understand why several years ago during a fast, the Lord told me that it's going to become very dangerous and very difficult to be a Christian missionary. Why? Because the U.S. government is going to make it difficult. And the only people who are going to be able to serve the Lord overseas will be those who have a business, a skill, and a legitimate reason to be in that country. I got to take a break. Marc Faber will be calling in when we come back after this break. You're listening to True News. I'm Rick Wiles.
Reporting the countdown to the second coming of Jesus Christ. You're listening to True News, the end-time newscast.
This is Max McClain. In times of distress, who will be there for you? Listen to the Bible from 2 Samuel 22. The Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded. He shot arrows and scattered the enemies, bolts of lightning and routed them. The valleys of the seas were exposed, and the foundations of the earth laid bare at the rebuke of the Lord. He reached down from on high and took hold of me. He drew me out of deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemy, from my foes who were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my disaster, but the Lord was my support. From 2 Samuel 22. Listen to the Bible. It's great for the soul.
Be able to hear the Word of God today and every day. Hear more at radiobible.org. That's radiobible.org.
This is True News, your alternative source for global news, analysis, and commentary. I'm Rick Wiles. To taper or not to taper, that's the question. At least that's what the mainstream news media wants us to think about what is being debated inside the hallowed halls of the Federal Reserve. For months, the news media in America has sent forth conflicting messages. First, the Fed plans to taper or curtail its massive funny money quantitative easing scheme. Second, no, the Fed will not taper. It's business as usual. Keep the printing presses running. Here's an example of the doublespeak I'm talking about. The first report was published a week ago. The newspaper said 2 Federal Reserve regional presidents suggested that the central bank could ease its extraordinary efforts to stimulate the economy sooner rather than later, but stop short of providing an exact time frame. A second report, however, said at the Federal Reserve meeting this week, Chairman Ben Bernanke confirmed the bond buying would continue as economic growth was only modest and jobs remained an issue. Now, I see this kind of doublespeak in the news media all the time regarding the economy. There is a disconnection from reality. Unemployment is high. Millions of homes still in foreclosure. The banks are sitting on a massive shadow inventory of foreclosed homes. Taxes and regulations are going sky high, yet the Wall Street markets are soaring and the price of gold is declining. Why is the market up when the economy is down? Who can make sense of this insanity? None other than Mr. Marc Faber. Born in Switzerland, he obtained his Ph.D. in economics at the age of 24. He is the founder and president of Marc Faber Limited. He is the editor and publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report, which you can read at gloomboomdoom.com. He's on the telephone from Asia. Mr. Faber, welcome back to True News.
Thank you very much.
Well, can you make sense of this insanity? Why are the markets up when the economy is down?
Well, basically, when you print money, and this is the key problem of money printing and asset purchases and easy monetary policies, the printed money does not flow into an economy evenly. In other words, if you look back at the last 15 years in the U.S., the money first flowed into NASDAQ stocks, 97 to March 2000. And between actually October 99 and March 2000, the NASDAQ doubled in price, but the Federal Reserve couldn't see a bubble. And then the NASDAQ collapsed, and additional money printing then led to a huge credit bubble, and the credit flowed, and that the Federal Reserve simply doesn't control where the money flows to. The credit then flowed into the housing market and created a gigantic housing bubble, which the Fed didn't see at all either. And then the housing bubble collapsed, and we had a financial crisis. And after September 2007, the Fed slashed interest rates to essentially zero on the Fed fund rate. And then the price of oil doubled into July 2008. to $147, and then within 6 months it collapsed to $32, and then more money printing, and this time it flowed mostly into equities and bonds until a year ago. Since July 2012, bonds have declined in value. In other words, interest rates have gone up substantially. So basically, the problem is the money printing will go somewhere. It can go into commodities, equities, real estate, or it can go into consumer prices. So far, it hasn't gone that much into consumer prices, although all your listeners and you will tell me that your cost of living are, of course, rising by more than, say, 2% per annum. They're likely to rise at, say, 5% per annum or even more if you include higher taxes, higher insurance premiums, higher health care costs, higher educational costs, higher food prices, higher energy and transportation costs, and so forth and so on. But the Fed members who work at the Fed, they basically don't count that as inflation because they're academics. They live in a different world. They don't live the world of honest and decent working people. They live in the world of government-paid employees that have no clue.
Mark, can the Federal Reserve ever withdraw from the QE cocaine habit?
They can, but I don't think they will, because if you look at the next Fed chairman, and I know the thinking behind the Fed, and I know numerous of their senior staff members and governors, they will appoint someone who is, again, a money printer, maybe even more of a money printer than Mr. Bernanke was. I think Janet Yellen, if she becomes Fed chairman, she will make Mr. Bernanke look like a hawk.
This should be interesting. Mark, this massive money printing by Western banks simultaneously, this is unprecedented. So there's nothing in the text...
Unprecedented on this scale.
Yes, so there's nothing in textbooks and history books that we can look back to and say this is what's going to happen, because we could look at individual countries, but never have we seen multiple countries coordinate their money printing.
Correct.
So what can we anticipate in the future if we really don't know where this is taking us?
Well, basically, if a country individually or a region like Latin America in the 80s or some Eastern European countries after the breakdown of the Berlin Wall, basically they had high inflation and hyperinflation. So one of the symptoms of this hyperinflation is a collapse in the currency. Now, if all the central banks in the world print money at the same time, then obviously the currency, the dollar, will not collapse necessarily against the euro and against the yen and other currencies. They'll all go down together. They'll go down together probably against assets such as real estate, such as equities, and against the only honest cash, which is basically precious metals like silver, gold, platinum, palladium. So
this worldwide quantitative easing money printing scheme, this is a race to the bottom.
Yes, correct. And in my view, and this is also the analysis of many other observers and economists, it's not going to help the man on the street, the middle class. On the contrary, it rather hurts them, because the money lifts actually some costs, and companies can increase their prices, and commodity prices go up. In other words, the price of oil is down from the peak, but if you compare it to the 1990s, when it was around, the low in the 1990s was in 98, $10 a barrel. We're still above $100 a barrel. You look at food prices, at steel prices, at cement prices. All these prices are much higher today than they were 10, 15 years ago. And real estate is, of course, a fragmented market. Some real estate has declined because there was an oversupply in Las Vegas, Phoenix, Atlanta, and so forth. But high-end properties in London, Mayfair, Knightsbridge, New York, Park Avenue, Madison, and on the west side in desirable locations, in the Hamptons, is all at record prices. Art prices are at record prices, and so forth and so on. Rents are going up. So this all hurts people who don't have assets. And the asset ownership in the world is very concentrated among, say, not even 5% of the population owns the bulk of all the world's assets.
Mark, will the BRIC nations ever be in a position to alter the direction of the global economy, or are they being forced to go along with what the Western nations are doing?
Well, basically, if the Federal Reserve prints money, the other central banks, unless they're willing to tolerate a much stronger currency, they're kind of forced to also print money. And that then leads to undesirable consequences and unintended consequences. But in general, I would say, very clearly over the last 10 years and even today, the growth, the economic growth in emerging economies, in the BRICS, is of course much higher than in Europe and in the US. Now, will they suffer? Yes, at the present time, there is a meaningful slowdown in economic activity in emerging economies. In my view, there is, say, I live in Asia. In Asia, there's practically no growth at the present time. Doesn't mean that we are in a recession, but there's no growth.
Mark, the German Bundesbank said today that Greece will need another bailout next year.
Another one.
Another one. I thought we fixed it, right?
Well, Greece is like the U.S. The U.S. needs more and more QEs. As I said 3 years ago, when they started with QEs, it will go to QE 99. And Greece will need endless bailouts. Why not? Mm-hmm. If you can get money from some fools, why should you work? You just sit on your island in Greece. The foreign workers from Romania, from Bulgaria, from Eastern Europe, they do the manual work. They serve in restaurants and on ships. And the Greek men drink their ouzo.
Well, at what point do the German people say, we're tired of financing the people in Greece?
Yes, I agree. At what point do Americans, hardworking Americans, say, we're tired of Mr. Obama, who essentially takes our money and gives it and hands it out to people, many of whom don't want to work and abuse the system? Yeah, the question is, in a democracy, when do you reach the boiling point?
I agree. I was watching last night on Fox TV a very disturbing report about how the Obama administration is using government-funded propaganda to break down resistance to welfare, where they are using, like in South Florida, in the Cuban communities, they're using Spanish language soap operas on the radio. And the actors are talking about family members who will not take welfare. And it's all government propaganda to break down the resistance in the population to receiving welfare. I mean, what Mr. Obama is doing is literally he's using our funds, our taxpayer money, to persuade people to take more taxpayer money.
Yes, I tell you.
It's insane.
We have a socialist.
Yes.
But basically what it boils down to, in a democracy, if you have more people who essentially vote for their living than people who work for their living, it's very clear that they will have a majority. And you can buy votes by handing out money. You don't give people a big brown envelope under the table to vote for you, but you give them benefits.
Mark, countries all over the world
it's actually tragic. It's tragic.
Yes. At some point, socialism has to go just flat broke. And I fear at the end of the road of socialism is raw fascism, totalitarian police state. Because what are you going to do when you have tens of millions of people who have grown up thinking that somebody should take care of them?
Yeah, sure. This is a huge potential problem in the long run. That's why I'm not particularly optimistic. But you understand, until the system breaks down, how long did it take until the Russian Revolution of 1918, until the French Revolution of 1789? It can take a long time, and the systems can survive for a long time, especially if you can fool the people with money printing. Nobody talks in the U.S. among the non-educated people, among the masses, about the huge unfunded liabilities, but they are there. And the government debt was, it grew from essentially zero 200 years ago to $1 trillion in 1980. We were at $5 trillion in year 1999, and now we're at $17 trillion. And it will continue to expand rapidly.
Yes, and one economist said if you add together all of the liabilities of the U.S. government, it's over $100 trillion.
Yeah, probably even more. But these figures are real. If the U.S. government had to account like a corporation according to GAAP rules and regulations, then the deficit annually of the U.S. government in the last few years would not have been, say, $1 trillion, $1.1 trillion, but it would have been $5 trillion.
Mark, governments around the world are putting into place the procedures for bank bail-ins. So it's obvious now, since we saw what happened in Cyprus, it won't be bailouts, it will be bail-ins where they just reach in and they take the money from the people who had nothing to do with the mistakes of the bank.
I agree with you. I couldn't agree more. But there is a lesson to be learned. In a normal system, normal meaning that you have honest money, you have a responsible central bank. What is the safest investment? Treasury bills and bank deposits. But in today's world, maybe cash, in other words, in treasury bills and in bank deposits may not be all that safe. That's why I'm telling people, I may not like stocks, and I think they're going to go down. But do you want to take the risk to have all your money in a bank? And then, as in Cyprus, the people that have less than 100,000 on deposits, they get the 100% of the money back. But the people that have $5 or $10 million, they're going to lose 60%. You want to take that risk? So you have to essentially diversify out of banks and out of cash.
The very fact that they are doing bail-ins undermines the confidence in the banking system. I mean, why would anybody have large sums of money in a bank if there is a high chance that the government is going to take your money to pay the bank's debts?
Yes, but you have to understand, why does Janet Yellen a few years ago in 2009 say, if it were possible to take interest rates into negative territory, I would be voting for that. Negative interest rates are, say you have a deposit of $100,000, at the end of the year you get $95,000 back. These are negative interest rates. Now, technically, it's not so easy to implement, but they can have negative interest rates in real terms. In other words, your cost of living is going up by 5%, and your deposits earn you essentially next to nothing, 0, or 0.25% or 0.5%. So you're losing out purchasing power every year. And the idea of the central banks is essentially to force people to do something with their money, ideally to go and spend it. But obviously, the well-to-do people have spent it, but they don't buy consumer goods because, say you have an income of $5 million annually or $1 million annually. How much food will you buy? How much clothing will you buy? There's a limit to that. So you buy assets. You buy paintings, you buy diamonds, you buy some gold, some Hampton properties.
Are you suggesting that the real purpose of the bail-in was to scare the daylights out of people to take their money out and go spend it?
Well, not necessarily. You see, don't overestimate the intelligence of central banks.
Okay.
But basically, what Yellen said at that time, namely, if she could vote for negative interest rates, she would be voting for that. By having negative interest rates, you force people essentially to do something with the money, in the view of the central banks, ideally to spend it. Now, it should be clear to any man with common sense that spending does not create wealth. What creates wealth in a society is capital spending. In other words, investments in plant and equipment, in other words, the acquisition of land, then the construction of the factory, the acquisition of the machinery, and then the production. That creates wealth. And the infrastructure creates wealth, and education creates wealth, and also research and development. So these are things that create wealth. Whether you and I go and eat a hamburger or borrow money to go on a holiday, it doesn't create wealth.
Mark, on the question of the NSA spying, the Snowden revelations have confirmed what many people have suspected and feared for a long, long time. But the spying seems to be on a grander scale than anybody imagined. Great
They failed to spy on Benghazi.
Yes, I would like to hear the phone calls out of Benghazi. That would be a great thing. We'd hear about gun running or something like that. But the fact that literally billions of phone calls and emails are being collected per day worldwide. How are people in other parts of the world taking this news that the U.S. is reading their mail?
Well, to really damage the NSA, everybody who sends an email should mention a few times bomb, terrorism, and attacks, and things like this. And they have so many messages, they won't be able to cope with it.
Overload the system.
Yes, overload the system. But basically, you see, our society has moved from, I would argue the Western society, from the society of builders, of pioneers, to a society that is extremely indifferent and complacent and ignorant. Because I've seen so many interviews where they ask people, would you be in favor of this? Or what does July 4th stand for? Is it because the U.S. conquered Mexico and so forth and so on? The majority of people in the U.S. do not know what July 4 means. And similar other questions, they just don't know. And so I think actually the public, most of the people say, okay, fine, the government listens to us, so what?
I happen to agree with you.
That is the problem.
They're very complacent, and they have been conditioned to give up their freedom in return for pursuing their just normal everyday desires. They have the freedom to watch TV, to watch pornography, to watch anything, and all they have to do is give up their freedom. Hey, one last question. Are you expecting a downturn in the markets in the latter part of 2013?
Well, we had a huge rally from the lows. S&P 666 on March 6, 2009. We more than doubled. We're up something like almost 150%. And unlike other economists who believe that the U.S. economy will strengthen, I rather see the U.S. economy weakening. I see Europe with no recovery. And I see a meaningful slowdown in emerging economies that will then have an impact on growth in the world. So I'm not that optimistic that stocks will continue to go up. But, of course, if they continue with their asset purchases at $85 billion a month, and if they increase them, in my view, they're not going to taper. The question will be, do we increase it? That is the question.
They may actually increase.
But, rest assured, it will all end in a disaster. The question is, will the disaster strike now or in 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is? But it will be bad.
And the longer that they put this off, the greater the fall.
I think so, yes. I think it could become then, the longer that they can postpone the problems, the larger the problems will become. Don't forget, what caused the crisis in 2007, 2008 was not the free market. What caused the crisis was basically government intervention into the free market, in particular with monetary measures, in other words, keeping interest rates artificially low, and completely disregarding the excessive credit growth. Between 2000 and 2007, credit in the U.S., in other words, household debt, corporate debt, government debt, grew at 5 times the rate of nominal GDP. It's simply not sustainable. And whereas in 1982, our total debt to GDP, including government, household, corporate, was 140%, now, and I'm not even included the unfunded liabilities, we're talking now about something over 300%.
You said a few minutes ago that you think there's a possibility the Fed may actually increase its quantitative easing?
Yes, I think so. They will, if the stock market doesn't go down, they will leave it at 85 billion. I don't think the economy will improve meaningfully. And I think even if, as you know, I'm very skeptical that the rate of inflation in the U.S., they use a GDP deflator of less than 1%. In other words, when they publish the real GDP figures, they assume that prices have gone up by less than 1%, which is ridiculous because everywhere you look around, prices are up. Now, if the economy doesn't recover much, and if the stock market should start to go down, and if the bond market weakens further because bond prices decline, then I know the clowns at the Fed will argue, we haven't done enough. And this is the view also of the neo-Keynesian Martin Wolf at the Financial Times and the lead apostle of the neo-Keynesian interventionist Paul Krugman.
If the Fed had not started quantitative easing, where do you think the real numbers would be in the market right now?
I think the S&P would be probably maybe around 1,000 or below, and the prices of commodities would be much lower. The dollar would be stronger. And concerning the economy, it is very, very questionable that the economy would be in a worse condition than it is today. Because, you know, optically, jobs have recovered, but most of the job creation are part-time jobs and low-paying jobs. These are not the high-quality jobs that were lost after 2007. These are different type of jobs. So with statistics, you can say, look, there has been a job recovery and this and that. But basically, if you look around you in the world of normal people, I'm not talking about the people that are at hedge funds that buy the Hampton properties and so forth, but among normal people, they all will tell you that their standards of living or their income is inflation adjusted lower than it was, say, 10 years ago.
Have we underestimated the willingness of the central bankers and how far they would go to artificially sustain the economy?
Well, don't forget, who benefits from money printing? Bankers, insurance companies, Wall Street, hedge funds, because that's where the money is flowing. And so all these people, they keep quiet. They're not going to criticize the Federal Reserve. And the academics at universities, they get paid by the Federal Reserve as consultants. So there's very little criticism out there of the Federal Reserve's policies. But let me just remind you, Anna Schwartz, who wrote with Milton Friedman the monetary history of the United States. She criticized Mr. Bernanke very badly in several newspaper articles before she died 2 years ago. And John Taylor, who I think is one of the more, say, reasonable economists or thoughtful economists, he also criticized Mr. Bernanke and the Fed just recently.
Mark, in the United States, we still have millions of homes in foreclosure, and yet probably a general number, only about 10% of the bank-owned homes are actually on the market for sale. So 90% of the foreclosed bank-owned homes are being held back in this shadow inventory. I have been told personally by several people, I just heard this again over the weekend, I'm talking about local bankers or construction company owners or real estate investors, and they have told me that the banks are receiving TARP bailout money from the Treasury Department not to sell the houses, not to put the houses on the market.
Yeah, that could be the case. I don't know this because I haven't heard this, but it would not surprise me. We have an increasingly interventionist government. And believe me, the more the government intervenes in the economy and tries to micromanage sectors and economic activity, the more you move towards, say, a planned economy. And we know what the planning economy did to economies in Russia, in Eastern Europe, in China, and in Vietnam. Total economic disaster. But I mean, complete. The moment these countries moved away from the centrally planned economy to a more market-oriented economy, these countries all had very strong growth rates.
As you look out the next 7 to 10 years, do you see any particular time frame that you think could be extremely turbulent?
Well, I mean, I'm also concerned about geopolitical developments, both in Asia and in the Middle East. So it can happen any time. I would just say, if you're investing money, it's like if you're driving a car that urgently needs some repairs, but you say, okay, for this short trip, it will still do okay. And then you're on a steep road driving down, your brakes fail. What do you do then? You understand? You're basically on very thin ice in the investment markets, in the asset markets, and it could happen any time. But how do you protect yourself? You want to have banks and in cash? No. You want to have it all in equities? No. So the best you can aim at is a certain diversification. But I'm sure most well-to-do people will lose a substantial part of their assets, either through taxation, it will be taxed away because eventually the populist governments will argue, you know why middle class and working class you're not doing well? Because of these fat cats that take everything away from you. So we have to tax them. And because they're more poor people than rich people, of course, they will all vote again for an Obama type of personality.
Mark, when this system finally collapses, what do you see? What do you envision as the post-collapse world? Are we going into? I mean, life is not going to come to an end. Life will go on. It'll be in a different way of life, but are we going into a new dark age? What do you envision for that time period?
I think we'll go into a dark age, and don't forget many civilizations, whether it's the Persian or the Greek or the Egyptian or the Roman civilization, they collapsed, but life went on, and they came back in another form without the influence they had before. I think if you look at the world the way it was in 1950 and today, one thing is striking. In the 1950s, the U.S. was way ahead economically and in terms of prosperity compared to the rest of the world. Way ahead. That huge gap has been narrowing, and I think it will narrow further. Now, the U.S. is still the superpower militarily, but I'm not sure they can afford to remain so. And if they have naval bases and military bases and aircraft carriers in Asia, believe me, I've been going to China since 1978. The Chinese are not going to sit there and be blackmailed by American military interventions in Asia. They will react. And the Chinese, they can afford to lose 10 million people.
My guest today, Mr. Marc Faber, the website gloomboomanddoom.com. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you being on True News.
My pleasure.
You're listening to True News, the end-time newscast. Rick will return after this announcement.
What causes a Christian's faith to be unsteady? Today's Moment with Charles Stanley addresses the problem of doubting God.
I think we're intimidated by people, for example. I think there is fear. Suppose I make a mistake, or suppose somebody thinks that I'm trying to be pious and holy. The truth is, you have Christ in you. You are a holy person in God's eyes. And I think we lose our effectiveness because of our attitude about ourselves. When we ought to be thinking, God, here's a wonderful opportunity you've given me to share my faith and to express who you are and the wonderful joy and peace and happiness I have in my life. They know I'm going through this difficulty, but they also see that I'm confident that you're going to see me through it. The reason is because of something we think about ourselves, and rather than keeping our eyes upon Him and asking, God, what would you have me to do and how do you want me to express this? It's all self, and that's our biggest enemy. Because the truth is, if you read the New Testament, it's all about sharing our faith. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creation. And all the testimonies and all the witnesses and all the things that Jesus did to express all that He was, He's left us here to do the very same thing.
Well, you know, this is an exciting time to be alive, to serve God for the glory of His Son, Jesus Christ. You know, there is a divine reason you and I are alive today. There's a reason we were not born earlier, never to see this day. I believe God saves His best for last. He divinely scheduled your arrival in this world on the precise day you were born. Every day, God gives us 24 golden boxes. In each box is 1 hour of precious time. The rich and powerful don't get more than the poor and humble. Every man and woman on earth is allotted the same number of golden boxes with 1 hour in each box. What you do with each box every hour of the day is your decision. You can sleep it away, you can waste it away on frivolous matters, or you can make every single hour count. We are told in the Bible to redeem the time. My friends, I'm a driven man with a mission to fulfill before my allotted hours run out in this life. My assignment, build a digital platform to nourish and feed the saints of God in the last days. God bless. See you tomorrow.